I didn't want to run a museum.
Yeah.
I wanted to run a factory.
Do you feel the same duty of care that this thing is historic? How did you find coming into two places with such history?
So it has to be treated with the respect it deserves. So it's up to us to preserve that memory and that patina and that sort of story that goes with that saddle.
Martin, thank you for coming on. Diving straight in with footplate to mentorship. Our previous mutual interest has been steam trains and other things, but you've also worked previously for large automotive manufacturing companies, and now you've started a very fruitful career in the cycling industry, most recently with Brooks, but previously with Reynolds as well.
Yeah.
How do you find coming into these 100-year-old plus manufacturing houses and taking your experience from automotive and relaying that to something that's so much more historic, but also so much more handcrafted?
It's quite a transition. The other thing the main thing about the scale of Jaguar Land Rover is, Jaguar Land Rovers can spend £1 million without blinking an eyelid, whereas the likes of Reynolds and Brooks, much smaller organisations, at Brooks there's only 20 of us. £1 million is like a quarter of our annual turnover, and so it's about having to scale things down, about doing the same things, but just trying to do them on a more, a more petite budget, doing them in a more effective manner with a more limited palette of tools available to you.
With with the engines that we've looked after in the Leighton Buzzard Railway, I think we both felt a duty of care towards the history behind them. Do you find the same thing with these two companies that you've worked for in the cycling industry, of feeling, you've come in at a very, very senior level, the most senior level at the UK level?
In Brooks, yes.
In Brooks. Yeah. Do you feel the same duty of care that of this thing is historic? And, for like Leighton Buzzard Railway Challoner, for example, one of the oldest steam locomotives still going. Everyone feels a duty of care towards Challoner and making sure she doesn't break down or run too hot. How did you find coming into two places with such history?
Well, I think our mutual background in working with steam engines and this idea of custodianship, the idea that you are going to, you're not the owner of it, you are merely the person who looks after it for the next 10, 15, 20 years. And that's partly true at Brooks and at Reynolds, and particularly at both factories, actually, is there some very old equipment there that is unique, and that has to be looked after, takes a great deal of skill to operate, is not the kind of stuff that you can buy spares off the shelf for. So it has to be treated with the respect it deserves, in a way that you perhaps don't get in other places. But also, just from the point of view of a leadership position, it's this idea of continuing the tradition of these factories and these products, and making sure that when you hand them on to the next generation, that they're in a good shape, that they are, but also that they are relevant for the next generation coming along. One of the things when I had my interview at Brooks that I talked about was, I didn't want to run a museum. I wanted to run a factory. The fact that the factory has machines that are 70, 80, 90 years old is only part of it. There's still a requirement to, produce high quality goods every day that satisfy their customers. And also to take some of that tradition and to make it new for the 21st century.
I mean, some of the machinery will be as good as some of the modern stuff. You still have people in heavy industry using Bridgeport mills that serve the perfect purpose and still come in within a tolerance even that some CNC machines, well, most can achieve it now, but some can't achieve. The eye of the machinist is often there with the old machinery.
Yeah.
With leaving things for the next generation or handing things to the next generation, how central do you think it is to inspiring a new generation of people to come in and get enthused about Brooks as a company, as a culture, as an idea as well? They're not just saddles that get plonked on any old bikes. They are long-lasting pieces of craftsmanship that sit on the bicycle, or multiple bicycles in the cases of many people, for years, decades even.
Yeah, it's an interesting way that we have to sell that to a younger generation. The stories around sustainability, repairability, durability is a story I think that resonates with people in the face of global warming and that kind of thing. And I think also people see waste of things that can be, you can buy a lot of things very cheaply from the Far East. But to have something that is durable and that over time you grow to love, cherish, and particularly with cycling, I think, and when we talk to customers at Brooks, it comes out in particular, is the stories they tell about the saddle that has taken them, whether it just takes them to work every day, or whether it has taken them from Land's End to John O'Groats, or whether it's taken them across the Alps or across Africa. You know, those stories come with the product.
Well, it's a long-lasting thing, and there are people that I know that have had their Brooks saddles refurbished and re-riveted. Yeah,
we get some in that are a bit like Trigger's broom, that have had new tops and new bottoms, but to that person they're still the same saddle. And the ones that do come in always come with a story. You know, they never come with, can you please just fix this? Everyone tells you about how many bikes it's been on, where they've been on it, what the best ride was. Yeah.
So taking that very personal approach to repair, to the longevity of the saddle, and having come from large automotive manufacturer and having tools at your disposal like Kaizen, which is, you know, the 5S stuff or the 6S stuff, Lean Sigma stuff like continuous improvements, minor improvements, factories, and, you know, very much automating production lines for the ultimate, you know, second to second improvement. What sort of tools would you have brought over with you from working from a large automotive manufacturer where scaling is huge to something that is not necessarily precision assembly, you know, at a robotics level where everything needs to fit every time, but at a craft level where you've got people finishing and assembling these products by hand?
It's an interesting balance to strike. I think, you know, if you went in with the full Six Sigma tool set of problem solving, you would bring the factory to a halt, and ultimately my boss wouldn't be very pleased because my production figures were down for the month. A lot of it is about enabling those basic problem solving tools that perhaps in a bigger organisation you learn and use every day, and just bringing them into the environment of a craft producer. It's fair to say that a lot of people who are working in the craft industries don't necessarily have a technical background, so just giving them some tools that will just help them diagnose a problem, and then that helps it when they come to me and inevitably say, Martin, I've got a problem with this, what do you think? And they've at least done that initial kind of round of diagnosis that kind of goes, we think it's this bit of tooling's worn, or we think it's this material springing back slightly differently, or whatever. So giving people those basic tools, the ability to just sort of think through a problem logically, try and get down to the root cause, try not to treat the symptom, but get right down to the base problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I've been trying to enable that at Brooks. The flip side of things, particularly at Brooks, but also it was true at Reynolds, is when we're dealing with something that's a very organic thing like leather, one hide to another, because it came, ultimately at some point it was a cow walking around a field, and each cow is different. Through the leather processing, suddenly you're faced with one set of hides that behave one way, another set of hides that behave a different way. There's no logical reason to it, and sometimes all the problem solving techniques in the world don't actually help you. You just have to shrug your shoulders and get on with it.
Yeah, it's not like in working with a synthetic where you can determine how, you engineer how the material flows and how it is constructed and how it will be malleable or manufacturable. That's an interesting point on the organic materials point. So would you say that you're sort of blending a mix of, particularly at Brooks, artistry, craftsmanship, like artisan craftsmanship, but also an element of your engineering background to productionize these things that you are producing en masse?
Yeah, it's a very, we sit in this very interesting world where our whole factory is analog. A lot of the processes are manual. We still have to produce a quite significant number of saddles each week, which I think surprises people when they come around the factory and go, oh, there's hundreds of saddles here. And it's like, yeah, that's kind of what we have to do. We're not a craft industry. We straddle craft and engineering, albeit that, the use of organic materials makes things interesting at times. But equally, we're doing press work, we're doing assembly work. The fact that we're doing some of it by hand just means that it's a slightly different set of challenges, and some of the things about doing things consistently is difficult. Having said that, one of the guys who carves the little stripe at the bottom of the saddle can do it. If you were to do process capability on him, I think you would find he had an astonishing amount of process capability, because he does it exactly the same every time by eye. He can do it with somebody looking over his shoulder. I have no idea how he does it.
A bit like coach lining, where they're so precise with how they use the paintbrush. Yeah. It's wonderful that it's still there, that you have people like that can be completely artisanal. I remember the story of the when I worked very closely with Campag, the story of the man that built all the track wheels. There was one guy at Campag that was supposedly trusted to build all the track wheels, and he had incredible capability to build them, but he would reject an awful lot as well. And he had an incredible level of pride in the work that he's doing. I imagine it's the same for a lot of people that work at Brooks, that there's pride in the craftsmanship, the artistry, and the efficiency that they blend together, and it comes out as a saddle.
Yes, yeah, and I think everyone who I work with in the factory is, they know that what we're making is a premium product. They know that people are paying a lot of money for it, and they try their level best to make sure that the very best thing goes out the door, even down to the way that we fold the cardboard boxes up and the way that the saddle is wrapped in the box. Make sure we do it consistently and with pride and with care.
They do look very... I remember getting mine when I worked at Evans. So I've got my C15 that I've had for years since I worked at Evans, and it comes in a very nice cardboard box. It's thought out. It comes out nicely. It's not difficult. There's not an excessive amount of waste. And it's a nice experience, not just to buy the saddle, but to have it with the leather saddles as well. You provide... Am I right in thinking that you provide the tools in the box for the longevity of the saddle? So you provide the what's it called?
We provide the proof-hide, which is the leather treatment, and we also provide a small spanner to tension the saddle. And it's actually one of the things that's been interesting is that for the last 3 or 4 months we've been doing a collaboration project, which has been really quite hard work. But again, it's a lot of this in where it steps into the craft world is about the attention to detail. And again, we've put a lot of effort into the attention to detail, not just about the saddle, but about how it goes into the box, what it looks like when you open the box. Is it all presented in the right way when you open that box for the first time? And just that, but also being able to do it consistently as well. Not that you're...
Sounds like an almost Apple-esque experience when you open, the box of a new iPhone or a new AirPods, and the box just slides off the top, but it does it every time. It's supposed to have like the perfect amount of friction, just that the feel is the same every time that you lift any Apple product out of the box. But the packaging is something that you consider then?
Yes, yeah. All of it is around, as I say, because it's a premium product, because it's something that people are paying a lot of money for.
Yeah.
You don't just want it in a carrier bag. You want something that elevates it above spending 15 quid at Halfords on a replacement saddle. You want something that is a rich experience.
Yeah.
And I have to say that I think my background at Jaguar Land Rover has been quite handy with that, because when you're working on products like Range Rover, that is a similar kind of experience. The customers have very high expectations, and understanding those expectations helps you to shape the product going forward, whether it's a bicycle saddle or a £150,000 motor car.
So you touched briefly on the interactions with the end customer, and from Brooks to the end customer, you have a distributor in the UK, there is a very direct flow of, you can walk out of the factory and then you can immediately see people riding the product, particularly on things like Bromptons or on town bikes or touring bikes, where they sit in extreme popularity because of the comfort that Brooks is known for. For your time at Reynolds, the visibility of the tubing, for you, was that as prominent? You walk out and you see the product immediately because you're producing something that a frame builder would then take and create their own craft and assembly on.
It was slightly different at Reynolds because at Reynolds there were kind of two customer bases. One was the big producers, and in Reynolds' cases they're not that big, but the biggest customer by the time I left was Fairlight, and you're sending 30,000 tubes out to go to Taiwan to be made into frames. But then equally you would be dealing with craft producers. In fact, there was a frame builder in Birmingham who used to cycle over to the factory and pick up his next set of frame tubes. And
what sort of bike did he ride over to the factory?
Oh, it was wonderful. He had in fact, we borrowed it for a bespoke show.
Okay.
They just had a shop bike that was a handmade frame, and it looked like nothing. It was just a mid-green paint job, hand lettered. But then when you looked at it and you saw the frame builder skill in it, you kind of went, oh yeah, this is actually quite special. It's like completely in disguise. But it just had a couple of racks front and back, flat handlebars, balloon tires, just from 20 feet away, it just looked like an ordinary little commuter bike. From 6 inches away, it was wonderful. But yeah, but getting back to customers is that, I say, at Reynolds we used to send out sets of tubes to people. But the thing that was always really nice was that we'd quite often get photos back of the finished bike, the finished frame. And equally, when you're out and about walking around the streets, those distinctive little Reynolds decals that people put on the down tube or the seat post, those are, you'd spot those a mile off and then just be drawn over to go and have a look at it and go, oh yeah, it's one of them, or it's one of those. It's, yeah.
Is it the 531 that's the most sort of famous historic tubing?
Oh yeah, yeah, and it was quite funny. Whenever we did shows, we used to have a little private bet about how long it would be before someone comes along and says, I've got a 531 bike from 1965, 1975, whatever. I've got a Peugeot something or other.
Yeah.
And we'd always have a little bet as to how long it would be before someone came up to the show with one of those. But equally, we'd then go, right, well, turn them round, go and have a look at an 853 bike, go and have a look at one of the titanium offerings and see what you make of that, see how much lighter it is, how much better it rides. And
you weren't just supplying tubing as a standard product either, where you were working quite closely in terms of R&D or specialization in some of the tubing for whether it be lightness, performance or characteristics of the metal with some of these suppliers.
Yeah, so that was kind of working on two levels. At a fairly basic level, and one of the big things we invested in during my time at Reynolds was a new hydraulic press. And that was really quite nice. It was computer controlled. We could control the stroke to within a millimetre. And that enabled us to make a much better offering on shaped tubes. So chain stays, seat stays, fork legs, that kind of stuff. Which, again, for the craft builder, because we didn't have big minimum order quantities, for a craft builder, they could order 20 sets or something, and that was worth us setting up, because we could set it up really quickly. We had some adaptable tooling. So they would just send us a drawing, and we'd, tweak it a bit, and particularly on where they wanted heat-treated tubes, it meant that we could bend them, then heat-treat them. Because if you heat-treated them and then tried to bend them, that was a whole sea of pain. So it meant that we had a unique offering that we felt that you perhaps couldn't have got from anywhere else. But when we were dealing with the bigger manufacturers, the likes of in Reynolds' world, that was the likes of Kotick and Fairlight. We always worked quite closely with them in the early design stages of a new bike. Fairlight in particular, with their extreme attention to detail, always keen to push the performance envelope of their bikes. We worked really hard with them, and they were prepared to invest in some unique tooling for Fairlight. So the tubing that you get on a Fairlight Strail, the latest generation of it, you won't find that tubing on anything else. That's unique to Fairlight. They paid for that tooling, and that's why that's one of the lightest steel frames around, and why it gets 5-star reviews, and why they're happy to put it up against carbon fibre bikes.
Is that the one that's just received a perfect... Was it Bike Radar gave it a perfect score?
Yeah, I can't remember if it's Bike Radar or I think Cycling Weekly might have done it. But yes, it received a perfect score, which for something that is often perceived as old-fashioned, as in steel tubing, for seasoned bike journalists who ride hundreds of different bikes a year, to say that that's perfect, well, it just doesn't get any better than that. When you're going up against, I don't know, Trek or Specialised with multi-million pound budgets, and there was us in a factory in Birmingham.
I suppose those big companies have got to appease everyone, but they've also got to appease their marketing departments, where they need to hit. Before this, we talked about having hundreds of KPIs versus 3. If you have a few core goals with the bikes, it must be comfortable, it must ride well, it must climb well, and it must be functional. And the Fairlight it's been a while since I read the article, but it's had, the way they built it up was with full stamped mud guards as well. It wasn't internally or mad internal cable routing. Adjustable handlebars, and then disc brakes, and I think they put a Silca pump on it for good measure.
Yeah.
But it looks incredibly smart, and having the dynamo set up, and just you're talking now about building bikes for people, not for racers.
Yeah, and equally not to fulfill a set of KPIs that says it must be within this weight band, it must be within this price band, it must be whatever. It's just building a bike that has performance, capability, desirability, and that you can feel at home on instantly. And I think the other thing is that it's versatile. That you can do a sportive in it. You could probably do a time trial on it if you wanted to. But equally, if you want to do Land's End John O'Groats, it'll get you there quite comfortably and with a great feeling at the end of it.
It does seem like almost the perfect bike to hit up your enthusiastic club rider. From, as you say, Land's End John O'Groats across Europe. I went over to the Netherlands recently on the ferry and cycled around there. That was brilliant. But I did it on a carbon bike, and you're always sort of worried, like, it's a carbon bike, if it breaks. And it's, is it going to be comfortable all the time? Is it going to be too stiff to ride on the cycle path? It's a race bike. Is it going to handle properly around all these corners?
Yeah.
And I suppose with steel, you've got the comfort of the material, because that's what steel is so well known for. But also, the complete versatility with how they built it up is fantastic.
Yes.
I think Cannondale kicked off a little bit of something a few years ago with the new Synapse that they brought out, with the integrated lights, and that from a mainstream, that's really good as a kickoff. But Fairlight leading the way with, I can't remember another bike that's received a perfect rating from a bike journalist.
Yeah.
Some have got close, but no, I can't remember another one that's hit all the boxes and then hit 5 stars, 5 out of 5 stars as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we've talked a little bit about steel. Let's talk a little bit about titanium, because your personal choice isn't steel, is it?
No. I'm a big fan of titanium bikes. It goes back to probably 18 months before COVID or so. I did a test ride at our local bike shop. Who got some demonstrators in from Jay Guillaume I think I can't remember if they're Dutch or from the Netherlands or from Belgium. But I went out for a test ride on one of their bikes and immediately kind of went, oh, this is different, this is special. Then did a bit more research. I ended up going to Jay Laverack, bought one of their R-Jack road bikes, which has been my trusty steed for ever since I got it. What was it, about 3 weeks before COVID? So it got me through COVID.
Just over 6 years then.
Yeah, so it got me through COVID, and again has done a wide variety of things on it. But yeah, recently, I think based off having worked at Reynolds, because I wasn't working at Reynolds at the time, but having worked at Reynolds and really got into the weeds of how you make a bike, what makes a good bike, what you can do with tubing. Earlier this year I took delivery of a bike from a Canadian company called T-Lab. I'd been working with them at Reynolds on a project. It didn't actually get off the ground, but I was kind of like what they were doing with their tubing. And again, I think some of this stuff around when you go to bike shows, again, particularly the likes of Made in Portland, and you see a lot of craftsmen doing a lot of really clever stuff. Some of it you look at it and go, yeah, they're just being clever for the sake of being clever. but then sometimes you just see something and go, that's pushing the boundaries, that's taking it to the extreme. And that's what I saw with T-Lab. None of the tubes on it, apart from the head tube, are round. There's round bits on each of them, but all of them have got shape on them, all of them have got form on them. the area around the bottom bracket is is just incredible to look at, in terms of just the shaping of the tubes and how they've pushed the functionality. So I think that is one of the benefits of working in the industry, is when it comes to making your own choice about the product that you want to ride, you kind of go, yeah, actually, the person who's inspired me the most is this. I would have liked to have bought a number 22 with their 3D printed bike, but that's a price level beyond what I can afford.
Yeah, there's some bikes out there now that you look at and you go, that's amazing. How much is it? Oh, that's more than my car. Like Jay Leverack are doing the Aston Martin collaboration.
Yeah.
You've got filament wound bikes like Bastion, you've got Sato, which are at the higher end. I think the Jay Leverack might be pushing it. And then you've got stuff, not necessarily mainstream, but more niche from bigger names like Colnago, where they're doing the Steel Novo.
Yeah.
And Cinelli have been doing, I know this is aside from Reynolds, this is Columbus choosing, but Cinelli have been doing the XCR collaboration with Columbus for a long time now with that mirror finish. So, no, it's really, really wonderful that people can look at and spot the craftsmanship and say, actually, that's really cool. There's a guy in my cycling club, and he's got a frame that I think is mixed 3D printed titanium lugs, carbon fibre, and I can't for the life of me remember what the brand is. But it's a really smart looking bike. But he's a composites engineer.
Yes. Yeah.
So he's looked at it and gone, I want that one.
Yeah.
Big cycling enthusiast, dedicated composites engineer. And the bike just looks so smart.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, there's steel, titanium, the engineering behind it, but beyond the engineering and actually putting the product out, there's repairability, longevity, and that's something that, from my experience from industry, that Brooks is well known for, is longevity and repairability. Can you talk me through a little bit about the anatomy of a repair? What happens when a saddle arrives at the factory, and how is it looked after, and how does it go back to the customer?
Yeah, it's one of the things we're really proud of at Brooks is our repair service, particularly the saddles that come back to the factory. Sometimes they just turn up in a box. Sometimes someone turns up at the gate with a...
People turn up at the gates.
Yeah, turn up normally with an appointment, I would point out.
Okay.
not just random people walking in off the street, but no, we get someone turns up at the factory with a tired looking saddle, and it gets handed over to our longest serving employee, Steve Green. And he will kind of do a bit of a diagnosis on it as to what it needs. And because he's been there for 46 years, there's not many saddles that he can't work out, even if it's something that's been out of production for quite some time.
Yeah.
But then essentially we'll strip it apart. Usually it involves separating the top from the rails, because it might be that the rivets are broken, or it could be that the frame is corroded, or we've had a rail break or something like that. But the important thing for us is, and also for the customer, the fact that they've come back to have it repaired means that this saddle means something to them. It carries a story for them of the rides they've had with it, the different bikes it's been bolted to, all this kind of thing. So it's up to us to preserve that memory and that patina and that sort of story that goes with that saddle. So the saddle will get stripped apart. We will generally fish out of either the spares or the current production stocks the appropriate replacement parts, and then it will get put back together. And the way it gets put back together is it will go through the same hands that built it, both in terms of the production process, but also quite possibly in terms of the physical hands of the person. We have a lot of people at the factory who've been with us for 20, 30, 40 years. So the chances are that the person who's repaired your saddle is the person who built it the first time round.
Do any of the Brooks products have a signature on them of who made them, or are they made by different processes? I know Restrap, who are they started up making recycled toe straps for fixies, and now they make all the bike packing gear.
Yeah.
They include a little tag with who stitched your bag, and Brompton have traditionally, they've always had the engineer or the technician's name who's brazed it together it's not in Brompton anymore, is it? They're just outside of Brompton in London.
Yeah.
But they'll always have the signature on it. Does Brooks have anything similar to that with how involved the members of staff that you have are with the saddle manufacture?
I would say watch this space for later in the year.
Okay.
No, but in terms of knowing that it's passing through the same hands, is because we've got this longevity and this skill base, particularly with the copper riveted saddles, is the chances are it is passing through the same pair of hands. And the other thing that we do at the end of it is we give it a little bit of love. We'll give the leather a good polish and a good feed. Tension the frame up to the right stiffness and hand it back to the customer, and they generally walk away with a big smile on their face. In the meantime, they've probably had a little bit of a tour around the factory, and we've given them a cup of tea as well. But they walk away knowing that the saddle that they've got, it might be 20 years old and has come into to us. And we'll go out and it will last them another 20 years. And we'll, take them on the next bit of their cycling adventure.
Do you have any favourite stories of saddles that have come in from where they've been?
Well, we kind of, there's probably a couple that go back from last year. One was that we had a guy who he actually came up to have his saddle repaired, also came to the open day. He had ridden from the Isle of Wight to Smethwick with a broken saddle and came to the factory and said, "Can you repair this for us?" And we said, "Yes, we can." And to be fair, it was a bit like Trigger's brush. It had been on umpteen bikes. It had new tops, new rails. I don't know how much of it was the original saddle, but for him it was important that it was repaired and he carried on riding with it. The second one we had last year was a real oddball. We were approached by a motorcycle museum.
Okay.
And back in the day, Brooks used to make motorcycle saddles as well as bicycle saddles.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Well, if you go back into the catalogue, we used to make all sorts of things with leather coverings on. Trunks for cars, I don't know, waterproof galoshes, all sorts of things.
Yeah, there's some old classic cars that have leather fixings and stuff on.
Yeah, and in fact, later on this year, we're going to be doing something with a Bentley with a Brooks trunk on the back.
Oh.
That will again is something to look forward to.
When you say look forward to, where can people find that? Is it going to be a YouTube thing?
They'll have to come along to the Wilton House concourse.
Okay.
Down in Wiltshire. So we had a motorcycle saddle come in, and they were restoring this motorcycle, and the saddle had kind of given up. The leather top had disintegrated, and they said, "Is there anything you can do with it?" And they said, "By the way, can we retain as much of the patina as we can on it?" And it was like, right, well, we haven't made anything like this for 60 years.
Yeah.
So we went through the various tops that we make currently, and maybe some of the ones that have been out of production for a little while, but not a long time. So we managed to find a top that was a reasonable fit, riveted it all back together, cleaned it up a bit, but not too much, and it went out as a rideable saddle. And it was quite one of these. There was a pre-war motorcycle that now has a 2025 leather top on it. Yeah.
But that's plenty of history all packed into to that. There's the historic, factory at Smethwick and all the manufacturing from the UK. Brooks is no longer its own independent entity. It does have a corporate owner, doesn't it?
Yeah, we have a parent company of Selle Royale based in Italy. They've owned us for over 25 years now, and they are. And I'll probably have to say this because they pay my wages, but it is that they are a good owner.
Yeah,
and we're part of a set of brands that are sort of complementary to each other. So it includes Physique, Crank Brothers, Pedal Ed as a clothing brand, and as well as Selle Royale own brand saddles. And there's this nice overlap. And it also means that we have some backup in terms of technical expertise, in terms of even things like IT and HR.
Yeah.
That helps us as a small business run efficiently, but also that extra sets of eyes, extra sets of brains, and also the ability of people to. We don't leverage a lot of sort of commercial stuff together, but there's a few companies where we share suppliers, and that just gives us a bit of economies of scale that we wouldn't otherwise have.
What sort of things do you share across between those companies? Is Brooks largely left as it's this historic powerhouse of saddle making and particularly leather saddle making? Are you largely left to your own sort of vision with prospective product or new product, prospective new services, prospective, you said watch this space for this later in the year. Is it largely an independent relationship between independent and collaborative?
Yes, is that our product development and marketing team are based in Italy, but they operate on a quite independent basis. We put together a budget for Brooks as a whole, covering not just the leather saddles, the cambium saddles, the luggage, the various other bits and pieces that we make. So we put a budget together for that, and also including things like investment in new equipment, investment in new products, and we have a product plan going forward through to sort of 2029 of new products, variations on products. One of the things that works very well for Brooks is collaborations, both large-scale collaborations with bigger brands, but also one of the things we're trying to do is to make ourselves agile so that we can do collaborations with small producers, because a lot of our customers are small builders. A minimum order quantity of 200 saddles would last them a lifetime. So the ability to do smaller collaborations as well with them, we're just starting to get that off the ground.
I suppose with Selle Royale, you're more pushing towards the OEM side of things. A huge proportion of bikes now seem to come with Selle Italia, Selle Royale saddles on from stock, but it's more, I think, focused brands that are producing bicycles with Brooks as standard or as an offering. Brompton, Pashley, you mentioned Stanforth briefly. I would expect, whether they're supplied frame only or built to order, I would expect something like a Stanforth to see a Brooks saddle atop it.
Yeah, and one of the things with again with the different brands within the Selle Royale group is that you're not going to get people choosing between a Physique saddle and a Brooks saddle. A Physique saddle, much more race focused, much more of a sporting rider. Brooks is, we know our market. It's long distance riders, it's commuters, it's people who value comfort over speed and weight. and if you want something that's really lightweight and 3D printed and carbon fibre and what have you, then there's an offering from Physique that you can use. You're unlikely to see a Brooks saddle on a Pinarello. Equally, you're unlikely to see a Physique saddle on a Stanforth bike with a roll-off hub and a full set of touring gear. So, but equally, having the parent company with that backup and some of that technical expertise and some of that, how shall I say, willpower to help out is really good. It gives you a bit of, you don't worry so much at night if something goes wrong.
Brooks is a very handmade company, and I can imagine, you very briefly touched on 3D printed saddles, which is something that Physique's been doing. Many other brands are now introducing, but that's all very machine orientated. You have human finishing processes, but you have a lot of machinery involved. What is one of the craft skills that people at Brooks hold that you don't see being replaced at all, like machinery?
I think it is one of the challenges for us, is that for us, the thing that is probably the most challenging is working with leather. It's when you see the people cutting the leather from the hides that we buy in, the ability of them to read that hide, read the surface of it, to look where they're going to cut it, where they're going to avoid any marks or inclusions, that's a real skill. And the ability to literally just pull something off the pallet, lay it out, quickly mark it up, and then work out how to get the optimum number of tops out of that hide is a real skill. And just that general leather working ability, unfortunately, is that in the West Midlands, where we're based, we used to have a real core of leather workers. Walsall was particularly famous for leather working. Northamptonshire still has quite a core of leather workers through the shoe industry, but there's a whole heap of difference between the leather you use on a pair of shoes and the leather that you use for a Brooks saddle. And the ability to work that and get it out as a beautifully finished saddle is a real skill. And it's also a skill that we can't just get off the shelf. We have to accept that when a new recruit comes into the factory, that they're not going to know how to make leather bicycle saddles, because the only people who do are the ones who are already working at Brooks.
How long does it typically take someone coming in and, not necessarily an apprentice, but a new starter, and they're on the pathway to become a leather craftsperson or a saddle craftsperson? How long does it take them from, day one factory to not necessarily master craftsman, but independent craftsperson, where they're producing their own saddles? Do you have a set cycle development plan, or is it more tacit where those that have been there 30, 40 years will determine the capability of the new person and sign them off when ready?
It's kind of a bit of both, really. The first thing we look for is about sort of aptitude and attitude. Do they have the right eye for quality? Do they have the right sort of mindset about putting the care and love and attention into each saddle? And as I say, the two sort of real hand skilled parts are the cutting of the leather and the copper riveting. You can teach someone to copper rivet in about 2 weeks, but get them to the point where they can do it flawlessly every time, is a matter of months. And again, within the leather shop, working their way around the various skills within the leather shop, realistically is probably about a 6-month journey, to the point where they're independent and can pick up any job within the shop. Again, because we're quite a small team, the people in the factory don't just have one job. Throughout the course of the day and the week is that they rotate through a number of different tasks. So yeah, you can't just leave somebody doing the same thing all day, every day. There's an expectation that if you're working in the leather department, you might be cutting it, you might be soaking it, you might be forming it, you might be trimming it.
So there's all these processes that you walk into a shop, or your bike arrives in the post, or your new saddle arrives in the post, and there's all these processes that you don't see. You see the final product where the leather saddle comes neatly out of the box with Brooks imprinted on the side, the little rail tabs underneath for your bags, because you can still get it's Caradese, isn't it, that do the hooked bags that will sit underneath the back of the Brooks saddles and hooks. So much that I'd not considered when it comes to working with leather, because I've not worked with organic material before. Worked with composites, not organic material. With the right to repair and continuous repair stuff, you mentioned the chap that had been with you for a very long time. Does anything ever get rejected for repair?
Yes, yeah. Sometimes there's just something that is so far gone that by the time we have replaced several components, that it's just cheaper to buy a new saddle. We do charge for repairs, but sometimes we just have to have an honest conversation with somebody and say, look, by the time we put a new leather top on this and repaired, replace the tension pin and replace this, we'll be charging you as much as it would be to buy a new saddle. So much as we can repair it, it's just not economic. It's beyond economic repair, I think, is what you say. But equally, some people will still say, no, I still want it because it's my saddle. Or they might accept that, maybe just back off a little bit on the requirements, and it just becomes an ornamental saddle or something they ride on an Eroica ride or something, rather than day-to-day, everyday use.
Yes, I suppose there's a lot of attachment there, and what people actually want to preserve going forwards. You talked about the shoe industry in Northamptonshire, skilled leather workers. With leather, with metal, it can be repaired, it can be replaced, it can be re-imbued with its moistured properties, or you scrub back in some. I keep forgetting what you've called
proofhide.
Proofhide.
Yeah.
The proofhide goes back in, and the leather is to an extent restored. Obviously, there's moved towards synthetic materials. Would Brooks ever look towards, in a world where you've got companies like Dr. Martens going towards leather or vegan leather, or what synthetic materials that mimic the properties of leather? Would you see Brooks ever going down that route for the same level, or is the supply chain reasonably set with, the British, Irish, Northern Europe leather that comes in and is worked?
I think for us, people always say, "Oh yes, the leather saddle is what Brooks is renowned for," but we also have the cambium saddles made out of rubber. So as a vegan option, or as a non-leather option, we do have the cambium saddles. The thing we're always keen to emphasise with the leather, though, is that we sustainably source it. We source it from Britain, Ireland, Northern Europe, only from 5-star sources. We don't source it from Brazil, where it might contribute to deforestation. We don't source it from China, where it may have had nasty chemicals used to treat it. Our leather is quite unique in that it's vegetable tanned, so there are no chemicals go into the tanning process. It means it takes us twice as long to tan our leather. It takes a best part of a week to tan the hides for Brooks leather. But it also means that those are wholly organic, in terms of what's gone into them. When we soak the leather in the factory to make it pliable to form the saddle, we can put that water straight into the drain. We don't need to treat it at all. So it's only natural materials in it. And we can't avoid the fact that leather comes from cows that once walked around a field, and to that extent, leather is a byproduct of the meat industry. So without us using it, we would be it would be going to landfill. Equally, the fashion industry uses huge amounts of leather in comparison to what we do. So I think from our point of view is we try and source it as ethically as possible. We try and use it as sustainably as possible. The other thing is that it's recyclable, biodegradable. It does not contribute to landfill at the end of its life. You don't get any problems with microplastics off the back of a Brooks saddle. So from a complete sustainability point of view, maybe rather than the vegan side of view, a Brooks saddle I think is about as good as it gets, really. You can recycle the steel frames, the copper rivets. You can also recycle the leather top. So, and also within the packaging that we send out, the only bit of plastic that we have in the packaging, and this is something I'm actually really proud about, we have 3 cable ties. That's the only piece of plastic within the whole saddle that goes out of the factory. So from my perspective, that is a real good sustainability story.
With the materials, with Brooks, with Reynolds, do you think we're going to see, or are seeing, there's this talk about the industry being back on an uptick after COVID. COVID was a mad scramble to get any stock, but perhaps now there's more of an organic increase in the popularity of road, touring, commuter cycling as well, with traffic getting worse, with petrol prices going up. But then also the sustainability of things, people will be throwing away carbon frames, but keeping steel and titanium frames for decades. Do you think we're witnessing, or will be witnessing over the coming years, a resurgence in not just steel and titanium frames, but also in the use of sustainable bicycle products like Brooks saddles? I mean, you can go to the Great Central Railway in Loughborough, for example, and they've got a really nice collection of bicycles dotted across all their different stations. But what you'll notice on a lot of those bicycles is they have Brooks saddles.
Yeah, and it's been interesting actually in the talking to people in the industry, distributors and the like that we talk to on a regular basis, is for us as Brooks, in terms of the big downturn that came after COVID, we actually sort of did all right in that, because we had quite a big sort of retail stuff through local bike shops and that kind of thing, is that if people weren't buying a new bike, they might at least treat themselves to a new saddle. And so we kind of weathered that storm. And I think a lot of people in the bike industry were saying, we're selling lots of inner tubes and chains and cassettes and handlebar grips and what have you. We're not selling a lot of bikes. So from the point of view of Brooks, is that we did okay. We had a downturn, but that was mainly sort of bike factories no longer ordering from us. What we're seeing now is just a gentle uptick in the orders from the bike factories. Some that have kind of come out of the woodwork and have started ordering again, having not ordered for 2 or 3 years. but also some of them starting to feel a bit more confident, saying, well, could we do a collaboration? Could we do a limited edition with you? What about, a limited run of this, that and the other? So we're starting to see people come out of the woodwork and be a bit more confident, a bit more prepared to put sort of some money down in terms of, restocking.
Do you think we're going to see more people riding Brooks saddles? More, well, hopefully for you, for Brooks.
Yeah, I'd like to. Yeah, I'd like everybody to.
But like with we said about the Fairlight receiving 5-star review as a steel frame, and your own titanium frames, resurgence of and increasing popularity of touring bikes or bikes for commuting. Hopefully there will be an uptick in bikes that are sustainably made, sustainably sourced. Some of the carbon frames might start to reach the end of their lifetimes because really they expire much quicker than a steel or titanium frame would. Even aluminium, as wonderful a material it is, can be soft compared to steel, titanium. Maybe we're coming into a new era for the bike industry of repairability, sustainability.
Yeah, it's interesting actually. In the cycling club I'm in, is that I'm seeing, whilst there are still people, most people in the club still ride carbon. On a good day, we'll get 5 in a group out on titanium frames. And one of the guys in the fast group rides a Fairlight, so which I find amazing. So I think from the point of view of people who are, knowledgeable customers, customers for whom the environmental impact is an important factor when they're buying a bike, and also from a performance point of view, because it's easy to say, oh well, it's all about the sustainability side of things, but from a performance point of view, the unique ride you get with a steel or titanium frame is something that I think more people are starting to twig. I've had and still do have a couple of carbon fibre bikes. I've got a couple of aluminium framed bikes as well. But my first choice now, in terms of the last 3 bikes I bought, 2 were titanium, 1 was steel. So in that respect, just having that, and what I like about those is the feel that you get from riding them, rather than something that's quite inert as you go along. Yeah,
I think with the comfort side of things seems to be coming through the cycling club that I'm a part of. I think more people are starting to think back to, like my carbon bike's maybe coming to the end of its life. Maybe, they've had it in the workshop with me, and I said, it's not realistic to repair. And increasingly their mind doesn't go Dogma, S-Works, Madone. It goes, Fairlight, Standard.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
And I think the other thing that is interesting is the rise of gravel bikes in all of their unbelievable many and manifold versions that you now seem to get, is actually a gravel bike. You're sacrificing a bit of performance for a lot of comfort, whether it's with bigger tyres, whether it's with a more compliant frame. Weight is not the same factor as it has been with, why am I choosing an S-Works over a BMC or whatever to save 30 grams on weight, when you realise that 30 grams is about a centimetre in your water bottle, or indeed a couple of inches.
Consuming carbohydrates on a ride.
It's
your bars in your back pocket, or
and people are being realistic about the state of Britain's roads, where riding a very stiff, a very efficient bike that's very stiff is not actually particularly fast, because you're dodging potholes, and you actually want something that will ride a rough surface
You lose the
nicely.
efficiency by it skipping over all of the different rocks. If you're riding a perfectly tarmacked smooth road in Girona, in Calpe, and in the Dolomites, and you're doing all those switchbacks, brilliant, fantastic, crack on. But
Yeah.
if you're riding around North Yorkshire or around Greater Birmingham area, Northamptonshire.
Yeah, I think Northamptonshire in particular.
It's HS2 that's done it in, isn't it? I was living in Buckinghamshire a year ago, and the railway runs right past Aylesbury, and the roads are destroyed. The heavy machinery, the increase in not just industry directly involved with the railway, but directly supporting it. And then you've got other things like the need for new housing and other stuff. The roads are just getting worse and worse. We can't keep up.
Yeah.
And the only road that's supposedly technologically advanced enough to self-repair its own potholes is the M25. And even then, no one ever goes fast enough to actually cause a pothole.
Yeah. It's again, I think it's notable now that, again, how when you look around people on the club rides, is that people, when I first started club riding, is that people were riding 23 and 25 mil tyres. In fact, 25s were considered quite a bouncy big tyre.
Yeah.
And on my first time trial bike, I think had 21 mils on it, running at 130 psi.
Cyclocross is still limited. The UCI cyclocross, I think, is still limited to 32.
Yeah.
Which still astonishes me.
Yeah, but now it seems, again, on our regular club rides, particularly on winter bikes, you're seeing 32 mil is becoming the norm. And so, as I say, having that Pinarello Dogma F with, 20, 25 mil tyres, people are sort of seem to be moving away from that because they just can't exploit that performance very much at all. In the same way that you can't drive a Ferrari down a back country lane because your eyeballs get shaken out.
Put in BF Goodrich off-road tyres on your Ferrari.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. But even the manufacturers now, you said about the Dogma F, I think even at the Dogma level, companies like Pinarello are recognising that there needs to be a widening of the frame. Those companies that have wider control of their moulds are saying, well, we've got disc brakes now, we can drop the chainstays, we've got UDH, we've got all of these different new technologies that we can use, the chain lines are changing, we can have wider tyres, which is fantastic. Because being able to ride something like a Dogma F or an Athos is probably a bad example because they're probably a little bit more restricted on tyre width, but the gravel bikes, the top end bikes, and the accommodation for 35, 38, even 40C tyres, and then the adoption by the tyre companies as well, Pirelli, Vittoria, going wider and wider. I think Schwalbe have been doing it for a little bit longer. I think that everything from being able to ride on a Brooks comfortable saddle to having wide tyres, having a wide frame, to having a steel sustainable frame, and people recognising those. And then, as you said earlier, them coming in at an affordable level will bring more people back into cycling, and will bring new people in as well, because it's not perceived as something, I've got to ride an uncomfortable metal frame for 3 hours on a Sunday morning while it rains. So, no, we've now got super good waterproof gear, we've got full mud guards, got lights, we've got radars, got helmets, got glasses, and the tech sort of, there's odds and sods happening across the industry that are really elevating the standard of what it feels like to ride a bicycle.
Yeah, and I think that it's being reflected in different parts of the industry, just in terms of, you need to ride clipped all the time, and then people saying, well, I want to commute to work, so I don't particularly want to ride clipped. It's like, okay, so you can adapt, you can have pedals that you can pedal in normal shoes. Equally, some of the cycling brands are doing clipless shoes that are kind of good enough to walk around the office in, smart enough to walk around the office in. there's a wide range of options out there now. Although I think we do also need to bear in mind that for a lot of people, it does need to be affordable in terms of. I think we always forget that the best-selling bike in Britain is the Carrera Vengeance from Halfords, which is 330 quid or something.
Yeah.
And they sell thousands of those every week. And it's an all right little bike, actually. It gets you from A to B. It'll get you up and down a canal towpath. Maybe even if you're feeling brave, do a blue run at a bike park.
I would not advise that.
Well, I think you should see some of the kids around our local bike park.
It's more like towing the professional line. If someone says, "Can I use this at the bike park?" Look at the back of the forks. Do not drop this more than 1 centimetre. No.
Yeah, but
they'll do it anyway.
Yeah. No. But we keeping cycling as a broad enough appeal that it doesn't just seem to be middle-aged men in lycra, or it doesn't just seem to be hooligans on full sus downhill bikes. That there's a place for everyone in the cycling community, and whether that's cycling in on a Brompton, whether it's going to work on your Carrera Vengeance, or whether it's going on a world tour on a Stanforth full touring bike. There should be a place for all of us within that world.
Imagine a scenario for a second that we're going back. You're staying where you are, but I've gone back. How old am I now? Say 14 years. If I was a teenager today, and you're on the footplate with someone that's interested in getting into the cycling industry or that has a fascination with cycling, do you think, to an extent, the industry? We've talked about the uptick, but do you think the industry has or had, to an extent, lost its soul a little bit, and now it's regaining it with some of these small makers? And
I think, particularly in the UK, is that we went through a huge period of consolidation, particularly when Raleigh really downsized and took with it the likes of Dawes and Claude Butler and those kind of brands. As they kind of either closed down, moved stuff abroad, and what have you, that sort of shrunk the industry tremendously. I was doing some, because a couple of years ago it was Reynolds' 125th anniversary. I was doing a little bit of research into the Birmingham bicycle industry, and what really annoys me is that you could literally buy everything in Birmingham you needed to make bicycles. Tyres from Dunlop, tubes from Reynolds, saddles from Brooks, gears from Sturmey Archer, and Sturmey Archer used to make cables, brakes, and there were rim makers, hub makers, spoke makers. You used to be able to make all of that. And unfortunately, it's the nature of the industry is that has now really changed. What we're left with is a couple of sort of perhaps 3 or 4 fairly big names in terms of Brompton, in terms of Halfords and Ribble. In terms of people who sell bikes in volume, then you've got the sort of people who are kind of niche volume producers, and into that I would bring in the likes of Fairlight, Kotick, Starling down in Bristol, Temple. Again,
Temple are coming up, but they're more carbon.
Temple are quite underrated, I think, actually, as a company. They
I don't see them about that much.
They make some lovely bikes, and again, quite traditional bikes.
Quite simple as well.
Yes.
Like not over.
No,
not
really,
complicated.
really simple. I think that's what's really nice about them.
Yeah.
They're just really accessible.
Yeah.
Then we've got the likes of Pashley, who are, and then when you get into niche producers, some of the craft producers, so we've talked about Stanforth, but then you also talk about Moulton,
Oh God, yeah. I always forget about Moulton, and then someone says about them, the image of one pops in my head, and I go, yeah, that's incredible. They've made a space frame bicycle.
They are fantastic, and they sell like hotcakes.
Yeah.
Maybe not here, but in China and Japan, if you look at the waiting list, if I was doing it yesterday, look at the waiting list for their £25,000 top of the range bike, and it's a 15-month waiting list.
I suppose they're one of the few brands where you would find hand-built wheels, full like steel or titanium welded space frame, a Brooks saddle, and full super record.
Yeah. You've just about described their top of the range bike there.
Yeah.
And it's a hand polished Reynolds frame with Reynolds steel tubing on it, or stainless steel tubing on it. So yeah, it is, and we've got all of these sort of, and then there's like a whole range of people who are kind of men in sheds kind of level. Even some of the really, who perhaps say most notable names, the likes of Ted James. You go down to see Ted James's workshop, and it's like a shipping container, and the worst organised shipping container you could ever imagine. But yeah. And I think that's probably the challenge for young people trying to get into the industry, is that even Halfords, with the number of bikes they sell, they don't manufacture in the UK, and their design department, as a result, is only about 4 or 5 people. And so getting in is quite hard. Having said that, again, there's other bits of the industry like Restrap, Stolen Goat, various other companies around the UK, Albion Clothing again.
Rafa's still UK based.
Yeah, I'm trying to Tailfin.
They're based Bristol Bathway, aren't they?
Yeah. There's a lot of companies there, and I would probably say, if you were interested in the design and engineering side, is some of those.
Hope in Yorkshire as well. Yeah,
Hope again, pretty good, and a relatively big organisation. So even if you can't get in at a bike manufacturer, is that luggage manufacturing, clothing, accessories and components. Yeah, those tend to be organisations that are, one, is more labour intensive, so you can kind of get in there more, and where they have quite a broad product offering that needs to be regularly refreshed. Stolen Goat, on a clothing point of view, will refresh their range kind of every, they'll have 2 seasons. Yeah, spring, summer, autumn, winter. Yeah, they'll have a kind of an ongoing product development cycle, which means that they need people to go and design them, procure them, sell them. Test them. Yeah. There's so much to it, isn't there? Yeah. So just sort of, you've gone from a leader in automotive to a leader in the cycling industry. So a lot of people, perhaps listening or watching, will be thinking, I'm either at the beginning of my career and partway through my career. Maybe I'm X position, I want to be X times 10 position. But a lot of that does come down to being able to lead people and to appreciate people's perspectives. What are the leadership lessons that you've picked up over your time as a professional in that space? You say you're an executive level member of these? Yeah, I don't really count myself like that. But in terms of the leadership, what lessons have you picked up that you're working with very human businesses? You're not working with numbers and corporation. You're working with artisans and people. And what lessons have you picked up along the way to support them, to develop them, but also to have success in the companies that you've worked at? I think I have a relatively simple mantra, which is that the people who are doing the job know more about it than me, as a start point, and I found that quite funny when I walked into Brooks is that I was stood next to people who'd got 30, 40 years experience, and I had literally been in the factory 15 minutes and was doing a welcoming address to say, hi, here I am. And I think then I said, I need to learn from you. And so one of the things I deliberately did at Brooks when I started was that rather than trying to stamp my authority on the place, was actually to look, listen, walk the floor, get to know how the factory runs, what the sort of vibe of the factory is, what the sort of rhythm of the factory is. And once you understand that, then you can kind of start to influence the direction you want to take it in. Notice some of the obvious things, and then also start to set a strategic direction for what you want to do. And one of the things with Brooks is that you can't throw out you can't automate the factory. You don't want to automate the factory, because if you do that, you lose the whole experience of it. And indeed, when I was talking to my boss in Italy about some changes I want to make to the factory, he said, "You don't want to bring robots in, do you?" I said, No, I said, "I don't want to bring in robots." He said, "Oh, thank God for that." He says, "You're not allowed to bring in robots because that would ruin the factory."
Yeah.
And it would ruin the product for the customers. The customers want it to be a handmade product. So one of the things that, again, I've been working on with the team at Brooks is about these guys, the experts. Part of my leadership thing is to give them the skills and the training to, not to do their job, but to understand either the wider business, or in terms of when they hit a problem, to give them the problem solving skills and techniques to be able to get on with stuff and to be able to solve their own problems. And then they only come to me, rather than coming to me and saying, "Martin, this is broken," they come to me and say, "Martin, this is broken, but I think this is what we need to do to fix it." And then
you just open the door for them.
Then I just say yes or no, or have you thought about this as well?
Yeah.
And how much is it going to cost? And where do we need to get the material from to put in a new tool, or to get a new checking fixture or something. So a lot of my approach with leadership is about, if you've got the right people and the people you can trust and do a good job, is just to empower them, just to give them the skills they need to do their job properly. And also within the team, identifying who are the leaders within the team, and just, again, giving them a bit of space to do stuff, getting them to learn some new skills. We're about to hopefully in September send a guy off to do his HNC in engineering, because he's a guy he's got a good engineer's nose. When he looks at a problem, he looks at it in the right way, but he's never had any formal engineering training. So this is kind of giving him the academic backup to the stuff he does instinctively, around measuring things, around problem solving, around being able to diagnose what's happening, and understanding a bit about materials, about why steel behaves this way and titanium behaves that way, and why you use copper rivets rather than nickel or something else. Just having some of that more background knowledge that he's never had the opportunity to pick up.
It does seem to be that some of the educational elements do fill the gaps, and it's when you have the formalised training. So, like for example, with me doing bike mechanic bits, I understand some of the theory or some of the practice for repairing something, or I understand intrinsically, or because someone showed me how to do it. but I don't necessarily understand why I'm doing it. And then when you understand the theory of things, like a derailleur is a parallelogram and the stop screws hit here and here and the B screws for this, just as one example, then you're like, that's why I'm doing it untensioned. That's why I'm doing it this way. And then you can improve and build upon that. But it's wonderful to hear that Brooks is not just developing people's, hand skills and their artisanry. Artisanry?
That'll do.
Is that a word?
That'll do.
We'll say it's a word for today.
Yeah.
But their long-term education as well. And I think investment in people long-term really does show commitment in both directions. You've got someone that commits to a company long-term and says, I'm committed, I'm passionate about the brand. You're like, cool. You're passionate about the brand's passionate about you. Let's work together and make everything. And that's when, companies don't have this sort of gutting number approach. They have this holistic, collective approach to elevating everyone while still respecting people as human beings.
Yeah, I think, I have to be kind of realistic, is that I am in my mid-50s, so I am around about 10 years away from retirement. And when I leave Brooks, I need somebody who's going to take it over from me. I want that someone to be someone who has kind of grown up through the company and has that love and passion and commitment to it. So that going forward, I know that it's in good hands. And, I can sort of, my aim is that when it comes up to retirement, I just sort of gently disappear into the background and nobody notices I've gone. And the factory carries on without me. Just
occasionally pop by for a saddle repair and a cup of tea.
Yeah, that kind of thing. And just, reminisce about the old days. But no, so it's... and that is quite difficult with small organisations. As I say, there's only 20 of us at Brooks, so being able to do that on a small scale is quite difficult.
The whole company's operation is 20 people.
At Smethwick, yeah. Then in Italy, we've probably got about another 6-7 people.
Is that for stuff like, because it's not just saddles Brooks makes, is it? It's bar tape, bar ends, other bits, and
yes. So the cambium saddles are made by Selle Royale in Italy. Things like the bar tape and the luggage is made by subcontractors. So the organisation in Italy is around procurement, R&D, and marketing. Some of which is shared resource with other brands. I
didn't realise it was quite so small in the UK.
Oh yeah, and it's funny actually. Is that some people think we're a lot bigger than we are. So come to the factory and expect it to be sort of, tens of thousands of square feet and masses of stuff everywhere. And then other people kind of expect us to, when we say we make, 1,500 saddles a week, they kind of go, what? So they're sort of expecting us to be making like 10 a week or something. So we get both ends. We get some who expect us to be enormous, and some who are astonished when there's boxes and boxes of saddles ready to go out to customers. Yeah.
So in the next 10 years, you said like 10 years from now you might be looking at retirement. What do you think the state of the industry, like the cycling industry as a whole, should look like when you step back into the shadows of Brooks? And
well, I think the one thing that the cycling industry has as a going for it is that in the world of climate change and congestion and urban sprawl and all this kind of thing, is that cycling is part of the solution. But I would want it to be a solution for everybody, not just for middle-class, middle-aged men who go out and buy, Dogmas, Scots, Treks, whatever. We have to remember that there should be stepping stones for everybody. That people commuting to work across Birmingham want something that is sturdy, reliable, you know, will get them from A to B and will be affordable. And to that end as well, you know, I'm a firm believer that things should be repairable, that you shouldn't have, you know, strange dropout hangers and unusual bottom bracket specs and, you know, weird diameters of handlebars and all that kind of stuff. The ability, you know, one of the joys about bicycles is the fact that things are interchangeable between them. And if we keep to a fairly common set of standards, and it does always amuse me that we go through umpteen different bottom bracket standards and then everybody comes back to a BSA bottom bracket.
Yeah, maybe people are starting to adopt T47. Maybe just a little bit.
Yeah, but it still always amuses me that everyone goes, yeah, BSA is best.
Cannondale did it, didn't they? They went BB30 on all their frames with the bonded-in shells, BB30. And then they've reverted back on, I think the new CAD is BSA. It might be T47 internal. Not sure. Is there anything today, is there anything that you think we should be talking about in the industry as a whole, me as a mechanic, yourself as an operations director for Brooks and beyond? Is there anything that anyone in the industry should be talking about that we're not? You have touched on affordability.
Yeah, I think affordability and accessibility is important. I think the other thing in terms of sustainable transport, and one of the things that I see quite a lot of, is around startups trying to scale. You know, you go to, I've been to quite a few bike shows where there's been people there with some quite interesting urban mobility stuff, and one of the problems they struggle with is being able to scale. And I see it again within the industry of small builders who started out small, they've gone to employing 2 or 3 other people, 4 or 5 people, and then they get to a point where to scale beyond that is difficult, both in terms of building an organisation that can scale, and also in terms of financing that, because, you know, selling, you know, moving from selling, I don't know, 10 frames a week to then trying to sell 100 frames a week is a huge task. And just in terms of cash tied up in the business, where do you go to make stuff, all of this kind of thing, having people who are willing to invest in these kind of projects. And again, you see with urban mobility things, people looking at last mile delivery, all that kind of stuff, just getting those things off the ground and getting them to a point where they've got a sustainable customer base and can, you know, build a business around around that is difficult. And I think it was brought home to me. It was like I went to a conference at Warwick University called Micromobility, and there was a guy there from Royal Mail, and he was talking about these various sort of quadricycles, tricycle things that they were trying out. I think that was around Northampton, actually. They got like a garage full of them that they were trying out for last mile delivery. And the thing that brought it home to me was he said, the trouble is the thing you're up against is a transit van. And everyone goes, well, yeah, but a bicycle is much better than a transit van around town. And he said, it's not about the fact that you can park the bike anywhere, you know, that it's electric powered, this kind of stuff. Is it for a transit van? Royal Mail know down to the last penny how much it costs to run a transit van. They know where they can get spares. They know what to do if they have a puncture. They know what to do if it has an oil leak. They know how many miles to the gallon it does. They know how many sets of bumpers they need to buy in a year. And also they know that Ford will be there able to supply them with bumpers, oil filters, tyres, gearboxes, whatever they need. and they know that in 10 years' time, Ford will still be there.
Yeah.
And a lot of these startups, I think some of the things that they struggle with is this thing about how do you convince Royal Mail not just to buy 10 of your bikes, but that in 5 years' time, you're still going to be there to provide them with body panels, lights.
Their supply chain is just not stable enough. It's not long-term enough. It's not stable enough. Some of these electric bike startups, like e-mobility startups particularly, they're buying motor systems from so many different places. Some aren't UKCA marked, some aren't CE marked, some are, some parts are, some parts aren't. So you end up with something that you will struggle to diagnose, that mechanics are not insured to work on, in some cases that may be built up, so they're not compliant to ride legally on UK roads, or might fail or have all these risks. So you have all these different parameters for one of these e-mobility startups. You've got established names that maybe have come over from the Netherlands or Germany, like Urban Arrow, Babui, Reese and Muller. They're established brands, but they're brands, they're not, it's not like Rally coming out with something. It's like, oh yeah, I had a Rally bike when I was a kid and I know that I can get that bit from Bosch and that from Bosch and that from Bosch.
Yeah.
Because the moment you source everything from Bosch, the price jumps.
Yeah, and I think again that's some of these challenges around for some of these startups, but equally some of them who are trying to get off the ground, and it's equally true of sort of craft bicycle builders who have aspirations to do things on a bigger scale. You know, some of the questions they have to ask themselves about, I've been making frames in my shed. And I quite enjoy making frames in my shed, but actually if I want to go bigger, make more money out of it, how do I do that? And I might have to outsource frame building and then I lose control of the frame building, and then I'm just a bike assembler and da. And so you can see that some of these companies that they think, it would be great, actually realise that they build a business to a level that they're comfortable with, and don't want to do any more. Prime example of that is probably Fiveland up in Scotland, who nobody's really ever heard of, but make a lot of frames for Kotick. Make some stuff for Starling as well. Basically do white label production. And they've been approached several times about, can you do more? And they say, no, because we don't want to take on any more people. If I take on any more people, I've got to get a buyer. I need to get somebody to do HR for me. I need to get someone doing accounts full time. And suddenly going from 5 people to 10 people actually means you need to go to 13 people. Yeah. And that means you need to get 13 people's worth of orders in every month to pay everyone's wages. And so it gets quite difficult, I think, for some of those to kind of scale, and also for them to actually keep doing what they really enjoy doing. Yeah.
So you think we perhaps need more, in the same way that Automotive can command its own capital expenditure or its own investors to do a funding round? We could do with that almost in cycling, and that there needs to be a long-term injection of perhaps cash or infrastructure that can support these small businesses scaling, particularly if we're looking at urban mobility bicycles, where you're not just dealing with 2 triangles, you're dealing with basically a space frame.
Yeah.
And then at times multiple wheels and motor systems. I'd be interested to talk to someone on how that problem gets solved and where that money comes from.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, particularly in the UK, where we have a lot of passionate engineers and builders, people who like building stuff. But equally, I think on a larger scale, we've tended to move away from manufacturing and tended to outsource stuff. And it's trying to find that balance. There are a few people who are trying to do it and are trying to do it on a variety of scales. But again, some of them just need to kind of, it's almost like they need that first order to kind of mean that justifies kitting out a factory to do frame building, assembly, packaging, shipping, all that
the
kind
other
of
bits
stuff.
that go around having people in a factory.
Yeah.
That is an interesting one to ponder. And I'll leave the audience to ponder it there. Martin, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate
It's been a pleasure.
It's been an absolute...
Right, thank you. There you go. Cheers.
Successful handshake.
Yeah.
Best of luck for you and Brooks and all that you have to come.
No, well, thank you for the opportunity to come talk to you. It's been nice to chew the fat over a few bits and bobs in the cycling industry.
Yeah. Until the next time.
Until the next time. All right.
Thanks, Martin.
Thanks very much.